Please welcome Jeremy Operer.
Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here speaking to you at the Amazon Accelerate conference, and we'll have a session on product compliance in Europe. Before we get started, I wanted to start with a short exercise just to see that we're paying attention and get you involved just a little bit. So can I ask everyone, if you're able to just raise a hand in the air? Okay, very good. You can put your hands down. Now I've got a couple of questions for you, just two more. One, raise your hand if you've ever heard of Europe. Okay, that's good. If you didn't know about Europe, although I think I saw every hand go up, then you would know a little bit more about it as we go through the session. Now, raise your hand if you're currently selling products or offering products in Europe. Okay, so it's about half of the room. So for those of you that haven't raised your hand, I hope you'll definitely learn something today about the product compliance requirements in Europe. For those of you who are already selling in Europe, I hope that you learned something new or reinforce information that you already know. Now, our session today is really about learning about the European regulatory landscape and how to comply. At Amazon, we put customer safety first, and compliance is a requirement to grow with Amazon. But also, it's simply the right thing to do. You're going to hear from two people today, one myself, Jeremy Operer, and also my colleague Umberto, who will join me in the second half. You may notice that I have a kind of a Midwestern US accent, or sort of. It's fading a bit, but my entire professional career, going back into early 2000s, has been in Europe. Since joining Amazon and also my time well before, I've worked with product compliance and safety requirements for products that are offered and sold in Europe. In the session today, we're going to be covering a few things. First, we're going to start with an overview of the regulatory landscape in Europe. Each region of the world or country will have their own regulatory requirements. So we'll be focusing on what Europe is, why that's a bit different. And then we're going to go into the regulatory compliance mechanisms at Amazon that Umberto will take you through. Reaching compliance is a journey both for the selling partners and Amazon. And we're here to make it easy for you, and Umberto will discuss that. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. I think you may already be familiar with how this works, the QR code, but in case you're not, at the end of the session, we'll host a live Q&A session. If you haven't yet downloaded the Accelerate app, you can find the instructions on the back of your badge. To submit questions or vote for questions others have submitted, you can use your in-app or QR code scanner to scan this code, and then select Q&A from the panel on the right. If you're unable to scan that, you can actually find our session in the agenda and then actually get to the Q&A section in that. Just one moment. So now let's start with an overview of product safety and compliance in the regulatory landscape in Europe and the UK. And I make this distinction for a very important reason. So you all knew about Europe already, so we won't have to spend too much time about where that is in the world. But just as a reminder, we're going to be talking about this region over here. But today, we're actually sitting over here in Seattle, so it's a completely different region. There are about 195 countries in the world. Europe consists of those in this area here. And when we talk about Europe as a region, that's a little bit different than the European Union. And the European Union is made up of 27 member states that form a common market. So product compliance requirements in the European Union will actually be the same across the different member states. So 27 of the countries in here are actually part of that union. The UK used to be part of the European Union until there was the EU transition a few years ago, also referred to as Brexit. Until then, the UK shared all of the European requirement, well, the majority of the European requirements. There are some very specific to the UK. And since the EU transition, the UK actually still has many of the same requirements. So what we talk about today in principle will still apply to the UK, but there are some nuances. There's also Turkey over here, which is not formally part of the European Union. Some people consider it part of Europe. But the requirements in Turkey are sometimes similar to Europe, but they are different. So that's going to be outside of the scope of what we're discussing today. In Amazon, we have 9 stores in Europe, 8 of which are in the EU, and then we have the UK as well, and those are the ones in dark blue. So product compliance in Europe is really about protecting customers. And one of the founding principles that underlies product compliance in Europe is the precautionary principle. And this is a cautious approach when dealing with situations where potential for harm exists, even if there's not yet definitive evidence of a causal relationship between the product and harm. So this is what underpins the legislative requirements that we have in Europe. And those requirements are there to protect customers, and they form both horizontal legislation, so almost what we often refer to as umbrella legislation, which covers vast categories of products or general characteristics across multiple products. Examples of horizontal or umbrella legislation are the General Product Safety Directive, which, as it says on the tin, is generally product safety requirements for consumer products. And you also have the Market Surveillance Regulation requiring that products sold in Europe have someone that's responsible for the product that's based in Europe. And there's also chemical regulations such as REACH, which you might have heard of, which broadly covers a number of products. There's also vertical legislation, or sector-specific, such as the Toy Safety Directive, which only applies to toys, or Low Voltage Directive, which only applies to products that you would plug into a wall. And then personal protective equipment, pressure vessels, and so on. These work together, both the horizontal and vertical legislation, to provide this consumer protection. And there are standards that are in place to enable you to demonstrate that you comply with these laws. Now, not every single product or aspect of a product is going to be covered in standards. So there are also other ways to demonstrate compliance, and that can be by following codes of best practice, guidance available for the particular type of product, or by demonstrating state of the art. So it's working with both standards, codes of best practice, guidance that will enable you to demonstrate that products comply. Underpinning all of this, and we talked about the precautionary principle and product safety, it's ensuring that consumers are not exposed to risky products. What you see here is the European Risk Assessment Guideline. And this comes from the General Product Safety Directive. There are guidelines around assessing consumer risk. If you comply with a product, the standards for a product, then your product should be demonstrating a low risk. And this scale here goes from low to serious, and is based on the increasing level of severity of injury, which could theoretically occur, and also the likelihood. Now, if there are aspects of a product which are not covered by standard or code of best practice, then you could use this type of an assessment to determine if there is a risk. And this is actually the mechanism and the tool that regulators will use, market surveillance authorities use to determine if a product may need to be recalled, which we'll get to in a moment. So I think about half the room had raised their hand when I asked about selling products in Europe. And I'm hoping for most of you, you're familiar with this CE mark over here. You can nod your head if you've seen the CE mark before. To explain a little bit about what that is, because many people may not know, it's a visible indication that a product has undergone the necessary assessment processes to meet legal requirements for being placed within the European Economic Area. And the European Economic Area is the EU, those 27 countries, plus Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. Now, the CE mark, it stands for Conformity European, and it is a mark that's actually only applicable for certain categories of products. So toys, for example, require a CE mark. Low voltage equipment, such as the products that you plug into a wall, those would also require a CE mark. But this sweater, or jumper as I would call it, does not require a CE mark. If there was a CE mark on this product, but it's not a toy, it's not personal protective equipment, then actually a market surveillance authority could say that this is not a compliant product because the CE mark should not be on there. The mark itself is one that the manufacturer would apply to the product to demonstrate that the product conforms with the European requirements. It is not a mark of quality. It is not a mark specifically of safety, but purely a mark that indicates compliance with the required regulations. The UK, since the EU transition, has introduced their own mark, which is the UKCA mark. However, they're still accepting the CE mark. One final point on this is that the CE mark is specific to Europe, and other regions will have their own marks. If you're selling products or offering products, electrical products here, they may have a UL mark, but the UL mark is not an accepted mark in Europe to demonstrate compliance with European requirements. You still need the CE mark. So there is a lot of information I'm sharing, and much more behind it. And I think two pieces of information which may be helpful and may be worthwhile noting down if you're not already familiar is where you can find the sources of truth for European requirements and UK requirements. There's the Europa website, ec.europa.eu, and then the UK website, which is available through www.gov.org. And those are governmental websites which can be challenging to navigate as they cover much more than product compliance. But the product compliance legislation is within these. And when there are updates or new developments or guidance documents or references to standards, you can find it through there. In the UK site in particular, you can find the Office of Product Safety and Standards, where you can get more information. Now, practically speaking, it may be easier to locate the standards relevant to a particular product. And you can find those through a couple of different sources. There's the European Committee for Standardization, CEN, which coordinates the standards that are applied in Europe, and also the Electrical Technical Committee, CENELEC, that's associated with CEN. And in the UK, there's the British Standards Institute. And there you can actually look at if you're selling toys or, let's say, furniture or chairs or high chairs, baby equipment, clothing, you can look up those products and may be able to find the standards that apply. Now, in Europe, and other parts of the world, if there happens to be an unfortunate or an unlikely event where something goes wrong and the product is found to be unsafe or illegal, then it may need to be recalled. And a recall is for the most serious issues where a customer could sustain harm and the product is no longer to be sold and the customers are to return it either to the manufacturer or to the retailer. But there are other corrective actions which can apply. It may just be that the product is no longer for sale or that the risk is such that it can be managed through a replacement part or repair or through updating instructions of use for the product. Product recalls can also be quite broad. So in Europe, you may have a product that's recalled across all 27 member states, and also even the UK. Or you may have a product that is only recalled in one country. Let's say it's offered in Germany, but it is not available in the German language, then that product may not be available for sale. The regulators may say that the product can't be sold in Germany. So there are different scales for the product recalls. In Europe, typically it's the manufacturer that would drive the recall, but you may also have regulators that are imposing the recall as well. There are a number of different sources for product recall where they're listed. Within Europe, there's the SafetyGate system, which used to be called the RAPEX system, which is the European Rapid Alert System for Dangerous Products. If you look up EU SafetyGate or the Rapid Alert System, and you can see an output of last year's report, then you can find products that are recalled in Europe. And this is where market surveillance authorities that are across Europe, when they go out looking for products that are unsafe or non-compliant, when they find those, if they present a serious risk, then they will report it in the system. The UK has a similar mechanism, and they report on the OPSS's site where they share product recalls and alerts. There's the OECD, which is it's an organization for economic cooperation and development. This actually can act as a one-stop shop because they gather recall information from all over the world, including Europe and the UK, as well as the US, Australia, and other places. I mentioned already market surveillance, and there are authorities that are in Europe that are actively going out looking for products that are unsafe and non-compliant. But you also have businesses. If you're a seller and you're selling a product and you then identify there's an issue with the product, you can report that on the business gateway that's available through the SafetyGate mechanism, and then alert the regulators to rapidly communicate that the product needs to be recalled or some other corrective action is required. So economic operators, and that's the manufacturers, importers, sellers, they have a role to play in this. It's not just the regulators. So that was an overview from the general European side. I want to hand over to my colleague Umberto, who's going to take you through how Amazon supports the regulatory compliance.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. Very, very happy to be here today and talk about regulatory compliance program. I'm Umberto, and I work to build those programs at Amazon. But what does that exactly mean? Building a regulatory compliance program at Amazon means building a way for you to reach a compliance state for all the products that you want to sell in Europe. And we want to do that so that it is as easy as possible for you to reach that compliance status, while, of course, meeting all the regulatory requirements. So today, I will explain what are the main pillars of such a program, how we can help you to make it easy for you. We will also look into a few examples, actually 5 examples. These have been taken from, let's say, the most important use cases in Europe right now. And then we will also try to understand what we can do if things can and will go wrong. So a regulatory compliance program in Amazon can be seen as a mix of 4 different pillars. Pillar 1 is about accessibility of help content. The first thing we do to explain to you how to comply with European regulation is to build extensive help content. Extensive help content is not just a copy-paste of regulatory text, is what you need to understand in order to be compliant with the regulatory requirements. Our second pillar here is about selling partner outreach. So not only we provide you with a documentation about what you have to do, but we also send out the detailed messages, specific communication to explain to you how to comply on some very specific requirements. Then third pillar here is about collecting those compliance information from you, and then depending on the regulation, that piece of information can be displayed on our product detail page. And then we have the final outcome of all of this. If you provided all the information that is needed, then your offer is published, you're able to sell, customers will be happy because they will get safe products in Europe. If the information provided is missing, inaccurate, or wrong, then depending on the regulation, we may go into what we call the offer enforcement, which basically means that the offer is taken down, and then you're informed about what to do to remediate. Let's start with the help content. There are 3 main sources of information I want to walk you through today. The first one is Seller Central help pages. Seller Central is our one-stop solution for you as a selling partner, also on compliance information. Here you can see a variety of content across all the main European regulations. Once again, this is not just what you can find on the regulatory website. This is what you will need to do to reach the compliance status. So it's really information tailored to your use case. Of course, there are different countries in Europe. Regulatory requirements may be slightly different between the various states in Europe. So again, content that you will see here is tailored on the country where you want to sell. The second source of information is Seller University. Seller University is not a web portal dedicated to compliance requirement, but it has the advantage of having enriched content, for example, videos. So we extensively use that way whenever there is, for example, a new regulation coming up, we create videos, we create interactive content, so just make sure that you check it out. This tool also has a very powerful search functionality, so just make sure that you can go through it. And then the third source of information, it's really something dedicated to compliance. This portal is called Compliance Reference Portal, and it's a portal that really speaks about regulation. Here, you can go very granular into the regulatory requirements. Not only you will be able to check information at a country level, but you will also have the opportunity to look into specific product types. So you're selling a toy, then you just look into what is needed to sell those toys, again, in a specific country in Europe. Then, let's see a few examples. I've chosen today 5 examples of regulatory requirements, 2 related to horizontal regulations, one about the market surveillance regulation, the other one about the Digital Services Act, which we'll see is pretty new regulations in Europe. And then we will see 5 examples of vertical regulations. Why have I chosen those examples? Because horizontal regulations are really top of mind on the European Commission and EU regulators, so complying with them is really the way for you to be able to sell. And 3 examples on the vertical regulation are because these are very, very important to ensure customer is safe. Now, let's look into the tool. Where can I provide, as a selling partner, this compliance information? The main tool is Manage Your Compliance. Manage Your Compliance is available from Seller Central. It's in the Account Health menu. And if you click on that, you will see the list of outstanding use cases where you're required to provide compliance information. In this example here, we can see that that selling partner is having to provide 66 different compliance requirements for the ASINs they sell. Now, once you are in Manage Your Compliance, let's see a real use case. Before my colleague Jeremy explained that according to the market surveillance regulation that is in place in Europe since July 2021, there is a requirement, I would say a very important requirement, to have an operator in Europe who can guarantee for the safety of your products. This requirement is applicable to CE mark items, which somehow they can be seen as high-risk items like toys, like personal protection equipment, so where we need to maintain a very high standard in product safety. For those products, a responsible person for compliance, so this economic operator is needed. Depending on the source from where you're selling, providing that responsible information may be mandatory or not. And we'll see those cases right after. So now, with the Digital Services Act, which, as we said, is a new regulation, it went live in August 25, 2023. That RSP information, so the economic operator in Europe, is also displayed on the detail page. So again, once you provide that information into Manage Your Compliance, make sure that the information is complete and accurate, because then, since less than 1 month, this information will also be visible to our customers. And you can see here all the details. Details are very granular, very specific, and those details are, of course, accessible even by authorities. Now, when do I have to provide that responsible person for compliance? If you're selling from out of region, so for example, you're selling from the US into Europe, then this information is really mandatory. You will not be able to sell without that. If you're selling from within Europe, then this information at this stage is on a voluntary basis. Again, considering that the information is displayed on the product detail page, by providing that information, you really show to our customers that your item is safe. So we really encourage you to provide that information, even when it's not mandatory. Now, looking a bit more into the outreach, when the information is mandatory, so the example where you're selling your products from outside of Europe, like US-based sellers, China-based sellers, if you don't provide that information, you will not be allowed to sell. In that case, you will not only see the need to provide your responsible person economic operator in managerial compliance, you will also get a targeted email explaining you what to do. In that email, you will get all the information you need, the link where to provide the information, and upon submission of the economic operator, we will do validation on our end, and when the economic operator is confirmed to be correct, we will also send you an email confirming that you're again available to sell your product. Now, let's look at another product safety information submission that we would like to have. As per the Digital Services Act, we have implemented the possibility for you to provide us with 6-sided product images. That's basically a list of images showing all the warnings and markings of your products. The reason for such a requirement is that we want to show the product safety warnings and markings to our customers. Where can you find that information and the possibility to upload those info? Again, Seller Central, the one-stop solution. You just go to the image upload, and then you're done. You have many options to provide those product safety images to us. You can upload one by one. You can upload in bulk. You can also upload through API if you're connected with us through those systems. Again, please keep in mind the final objective of this is not just to add additional images, is to show to our customers that your item is safe because it has all the warnings and all the markings that are needed to comply with the EU regulations. But then once I upload those images, where are they going to be displayed? Those images are going directly into the detail page image block, so they will be very, very clearly visible to our customers. Again, as the objective here is to show those markings to customers, and as they will be also visible to authorities, just make sure that what you provide is accurate and complete. Those images are, of course, at ASIN level. If you're sharing your offer with other selling partners, there will be reconciliation logic. Now that we've seen those very broad horizontal regulations, let's look into 3 examples for vertical regulations. The first one I've chosen here is energy efficiency labels. Energy efficiency labels is a new regulation where for specific product types, for example, domestic appliances, televisions, we will also have cell phones and tablets next year, you have to provide the energy efficiency rate of your product, and you also have to provide the energy efficiency label. So again, the process is always the same. You get help content about that. If your product is listed towards those categories, you will be allowed to provide that information, and that information will be clearly visible on the detail page, both in terms of energy efficiency and detail label. The second and third example that I wanted to cover is around toys and chemicals. Why those examples? Because again, toys is on top of mind of EU regulators and Amazon customers. When a customer purchases a toy, we want the toy to be safe. And when there are constraints, so for example, choking hazard for very young children, then we need to inform the customer about them. The overarching regulation in Europe is called Toys Directive. Again, if you're selling a toy, or if you want to sell a toy, you will have access to this specific information to upload based on the product type, and that information, once again, will be displayed on the detail page. Last examples I wanted to show is chemicals. There is a lot of scrutiny on chemicals in Europe. Chemical products, of course, bear a risk in their usage, and that is driven basically by the nature of the product itself. So we need to provide our customers with specific information about the warning and the thing that they will have to know when managing and using those products. The EU regulation behind those chemicals is called CLP. which stands for classifications, labeling, and packaging, and basically dictates the warnings and markings that you need to have on the product packaging of your chemical product, and that you also need to share with customers. So if you are in brick and mortar, that's fine. Information is on the product. If you're selling through Amazon online, you need to expose the same information through our detail page. And now, I've provided all the information. Am I done? Can I sell? Yes, but as Jeremy said before, things unfortunately can still go wrong. And here I selected the example of product recalls, just to connect to what we said before. Product recalls can be of two main types: private product recalls and public product recalls. A private product recall is, for example, a product recall generated by the manufacturer. A public product recall can be created by an authority. What will happen is still the same. So even though you provided all the compliance information that is required, you may receive email notification about product suppression because we were made aware that the product is recalled. What should you do in this case? Again, the email will contain all the instructions. We'll tell you what information we need. We'll tell you how much time you need to provide that information. Just make sure that you act on the email and that you act timely, because in case there is no action, at some point, depending on the use case, there will be automated removal that will trigger. We know that, unfortunately, not for all the cases we can fix the problem. There are cases where the item cannot be fixed, maybe because there is a product defect and only the manufacturer can remediate. So in that case, there is really no documentation that you can provide. The only option is to remove the products from sale. When you do that, please make sure that you also think about the environment. Normally, recalled products can be removed through a return back to your seller address or seller premises, or through disposal. Especially if you're a reseller and not the manufacturer, we really encourage you to prioritize returns, because returns can also allow you to send the item back to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is the one who can fix them. If there is really no option, then product disposal should be the last resort.